So mambo wazea. Good to be back. And I'm delighted that I am back, and I hope you are by the end of this message also delighted, but I can't guarantee it. And when I come here, although I work with churches, I really come to work with an organization in Haruma called Farah Community Foundation, and their founder and their executive director is also sitting here, David Oginga, and 50 at the high school, and 100% pass rate from Class 8 to Form 1. And that just blows us away. A mean score of about 340 for KCPEs, and top 2 students hitting about 420. And number 1 in their district, amazing, okay? They may live in poverty, but poverty is not who they are, okay? And that's just our... So I hear that Destiny Life Church are in a series about family and relationships. So let's just get right in there. Page after page, chapter after chapter, book after book in this Bible is filled with men and women and families who are seeking to follow God but are completely dysfunctional. And it starts, the whole story is about people leaving one country, coming to another, living with extended family, and all of them, without exception, messed up. And it starts right at the beginning of the Bible in Genesis chapter 3. You may know that chapter of the Bible. It's called the Fall of Man. And it says that the man and the woman were to not eat the forbidden fruit. God had said to them, have you eaten from the tree I commanded you not to eat from? And the man said, yes, I did. It's my responsibility. I'm so sorry. Put all the heat on me. It was all my fault. But that's not what the man said, okay? Listen closely. If you are a girl about to choose a boyfriend or about to get engaged to a future husband, here's what the man said. The woman you put with me here, the woman, she gave me the fruit. There's only one other human being in the whole world, and the man blames her. And you notice, he doesn't even call her by her name. He doesn't say Eve. He just calls her that woman. As a Christian writer, and he comments and he says, that's what we do in families when things go wrong. You know that son of yours? He did that. Or she's your sister. You ever hear those words? Those are fighting words. That son of yours. This woman. She wasn't my idea, God. There's this little subtle blame thing going on. This woman you gave me. Imagine what happened later on when Adam and Eve debriefed this moment over a cup of chai. Do you think Eve said, Adam, I admire your courage in pointing out to God where it was my fault? Thanks so much for telling God all about that, No. Blame and deceit and cowardice and denial and unresolved conflict. They all start there, right at the beginning of history, right at the beginning of the human story. Do you see that part of your family? It all starts here. If you ever read through Genesis, one of the things that will strike you when you read through it is the story of families. It's not the story you might expect. It's not a story of great nations or a story of armies or organizations or corporations, but it's a story of families. And it's played out in the sphere, not on battlefields or on courtyards or in palaces, but the story of God is played out in the sphere of the home. The story of God begins with the story of families in the sphere of the home. First, a husband and wife, Adam and Eve. And then they had some brothers, Cain and Abel, and they don't get along very well. And then there's a murderer named Lamech, who comes along and he introduces not just murder, but polygamy. And there's a man named Noah, and he gets drunk when his sons see him disrobe. And then Noah pronounces a formal curse on his own son. And Noah is called the most righteous man in his generation, kind of setting the bar kind of low. And there appears a patriarch, a giant of faith, a friend of God called Abraham. But he lies. And he says that his wife Sarah is really his sister because she's so beautiful. And he's afraid that a powerful man is going to want his wife for his harem. And he says, well, that's fine. Go ahead and just lie and say that you're my sister. And he doesn't do that just once. He does it twice. He then has a child with Sarah's maid. And then eventually abandons both that child and that child's mother. His other son, Isaac, and his wife, they spend their lives playing favorites with their two sons, Jacob and Esau. And Jacob, with the help of his mother, deceives his father and cheats his brother out of the birthright. His brother ends up spending years trying to kill Jacob. And Jacob goes on to marry two women. And he has children with both of them and with both of their servants. He favors one of his sons over all the other sons, Joseph. So much so that Joseph's brothers want to kill Joseph. And they end up selling Joseph into slavery, lying about it, covering it up for years and years and years. Anybody feeling good about their family just at this point? Because when you put your family alongside the first families in the Bible, yours are probably princes and kings. So let's start my sermon this morning. Good morning, Destiny Life Church. Good morning. My name is Gilbert. And since I reached the age of 3 and I could understand English, I have never liked my name. Gilbert. Now, I know British people name their children, because I'm British, although I live in California, I'm from Scotland. But I know that people from Scotland name their children, and we name them different to how Kenyans name their children. Like you have, I think, about 9 ways to name your children. And sometimes there's not just 9 ways to name your children. Sometimes you give your children like 9 names. You know? Like if you were born when the sun was rising, if the men were drinking beer when you were born, if you were born in the morning or the afternoon or the evening, if you were born first or if you were born last, if you're a Kamba, if it was rainy season or dry season, or if there's a name given reflecting the mood of the family when you were born, like maybe the name Joy. I know of a guy from Malawi, and he was given the name Misery. You know, any Lus love to adopt famous names for your children, you know. And so many Lus have either the name Odinga or Obama, okay? And one couple are having to defend their decisions. They have named their son Donald Trump Otieno. And let's not start listing the names of ancestors, okay? But my parents when I popped out, for no reason whatsoever. It's not a family name. It wasn't the time of day. It wasn't the mood that we're in. It's not a great ancestor. Just to be cruel to me, they decided, let's call him Gilbert. There was no other Gilberts in my class at school. There was no other Gilberts in the church I attended. I don't think there's another Gilbert in Scotland, okay? Like in Scotland, it's not a usual name to say Gilbert, okay? We use names like Stuart, or Alexander, or Philip, you know? Does anyone here have the name Gilbert? No, okay? Why did my parents choose such an odd, uncommon, unusual name for me? I wanted to be called George. After George Best, who was literally the best football player for Manchester United. Okay? I also wanted to call my boys Ryan Giggs and Wayne Rooney. Okay? But my wife was not supportive of that idea. Okay? So they became more biblical. Daniel from the Old Testament and Luke from the New Testament. Okay? But my name, Gilbert, it gets even worse. I was given a name that someone with a stutter like me found very hard to pronounce. I was a teenager that couldn't say my own name. I still have a stutter. You might hear it this morning when I'm preaching, okay? But I had this inability to say Gilbert. So you imagine growing up where when you have to introduce yourself, you couldn't say your own name that your parents gave you for no reason. And I wish then that I could be like the Kenyans and just call myself one of my other names. You know? In fact, let's do that this morning, okay? Don't call me Gilbert. And certainly don't call me Donald Trump. But let's go with either Obama, or I could do Patrick Matassi. I mean, he's not in the AFCON final, but hey, at least you got to the AFCON for the first time, okay, nearly? Let's read some names from the Bible, okay? I don't know where I'm going this morning, so just follow along, okay? Scottish roads are like this, and so that's how we preach. Who knows where we're going to end up, okay? But hopefully we'll end up together, okay? So open your Bibles, if you have a Bible, to Mark's Gospel, okay? Mark's Gospel chapter 1. And I'm going to read a little bit of Mark's Gospel chapter 1 and then swing to Mark's Gospel chapter 3. If you haven't got a Bible, no problems. I'm going to read it and you can hear it. Mark's Gospel chapter 1 verse 16. As Jesus went along the Sea of Galilee, he saw Simon and Andrew, Simon's brother, casting a net into the sea, for they were fishermen. Jesus said to them, "Follow me, and I will turn you into fishers of people." They left their nets immediately and followed him. Going on a little further, he saw James, the son of Zebedee, and John, his brother, in their boat mending nets. Immediately he called them, and they left their father Zebedee and followed him. Now, swing over to chapter 3. Mark's Gospel, chapter 3, verse 13. Now, Jesus went up the mountain and called for those he wanted, and they came to him. He appointed 12 whom he named apostles, so that they would be with him and he could send them to preach and to have authority to cast out demons. He appointed 12. To Simon, he gave the name Peter. To James and his brother John, the sons of Zebedee, he gave the name Boanerges. That is, sons of thunder. and Andrew, Philip, Bartholomew, Matthew, Thomas, James the son of Alphaeus, Thaddeus, Simon the Zealot, and Judas Iscariot, who betrayed him. Now pause there. If the Old Testament starts with a family, so does the New Testament start with a family. But it's a new type of family. It's not a family of flesh and blood, but a new family of faith. So there's Simon. His new name is Peter. Jesus sees potential in Simon way beyond what others saw, and so he changed his name to Peter. Then James, his brother, and then John, his brother, and they are nicknamed Boanerges, sons of thunder. Kind of makes you wonder, what were they like that Jesus decided to call them the sons of thunder? And then there's Andrew, who is Simon Peter's brother. And then there's Philip, who always brings people to Jesus. And then Bartholomew, who we know absolutely nothing about, except his father's name was Thalmai, which is what Bartholomew, we know nothing more about Bartholomew. You never hear of Bartholomew again. And then there's Matthew, which means the gift of Yahweh, or the gift of Jehovah. Okay. And then comes Thomas, and Mark doesn't seem to know his nickname, or Thomas has bribed him not to share it, but his nickname was Didymus. And Didymus means the twin. And the legend has it that he's nicknamed the twin because he resembled Jesus. And then next on the list is Matthew's brother. Interesting, there's 3 sets of brothers. And then there's James, the son of Alphaeus. Then possibly 2 more nicknames. Thaddeus, which means big-hearted, generous. And then Simon the Zealot, based on the Hebrew word chara, which means to be zealous. Some people think he was part of the Zealots movement, which was a revolutionary political movement, but probably not, because it didn't really reach its peak until AD 66. And then Judas Iscariot. And Iscariot, the man of the sickle, the man of the dagger. He's the knife man. Judas, the knife man. And it always says who betrayed him. He's always last on the list. Names. Names. They're kind of ordinary names. 6 of them have nicknames or added names that clearly indicate this wasn't a list of people who held high honor or status in society. You don't give a nickname to a titled person, at least not to their face. You know? Unless you nickname them Sonko. Okay? And notice how many sets of brothers. Nearly half of them are brothers. And that's interesting because it's worthy of some thinking sometimes about how God calls brothers and sisters, or the connection between fathers and sons. Like, I'm the son of a preacher. Who was the son of a preacher? Will my sons be preachers? Is there a new line of Levi? But that's a whole nother preach. There's a lot to think about through this simple list of names, because it's more than a list of names. It's 12 real, tangible, living, flesh and blood human beings. But notice the simple words. He appointed them that they might be with him. Here's a portrait of the fully human Jesus. He needs companionship, a support group. He needs fellowship. He lives as a person in community, not as an isolated prophet. He's much more African than Western, that's for sure. So he calls 12 of them to be with him. A ragtag bunch of misfits. And that's my kind of group. That's my kind of family. That's my tribe. And this is where I want to head with you this morning. Are you still with me?
Yes, sir.
I want you to meet the parents of the sons of thunder. Mr. and Mrs. Zebedee. Now that's why we read Mark's Gospel chapter 1. It mentions their father, Zebedee. The family fished up country. Mark 3 happened maybe around the Sea of Galilee. And Mr. Zebedee made a living out of fishing in the lake. It's also known as the Lake Gennesaret. It's the lowest freshwater lake in the world. And it's the biggest freshwater lake in Israel. 53 kilometers to go around it. I went to see your magnificent lake, Lake Victoria, one time.
Okay.
I was waiting for to see its magnificence. So I flew into Kisumu. Why the heck is it brown? I was expecting Lake Victoria to be blue. Something went wrong in Kisumu. James and John, they're helping out their father's business. They're mending nets. They're trawling their nets in the early hours of the morning. They're selling their fish in the nearby market town of Sepphoris or maybe Capernaum. But they hadn't grown up wanting to be fishermen in Galilee. They wanted to leave Galilee and get to the city, the big city. But that was just a dream. And a dream that really needed them to study hard and to learn a lot, because really the only way out of town to the big city in Israel was if their parents were wealthy and could send them to the city, or if they had been invited to study the Hebrew scriptures at the Jerusalem temple. But James and John, while they knew every inlet and every bay around Galilee, memorizing the scriptures hadn't been their thing. And so they were stuck in little old Galilee, only dreaming of ever getting to Jerusalem. And this needs me to talk a little about education in Israel in the first century. So stay with me. There were 3 stages of formal education in Israel, and it all revolved around what they called the Torah. The Torah was the textbook. So they didn't have textbooks on subjects like mathematics or human anatomy or CRE. Everything they needed to learn, they believed, was contained in the Torah. The Torah was the books of Moses. The first 5 books of the Hebrew Scriptures, the first 5 books of the Old Testament, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. Right. And at school, that's what they learned. Not social studies, not chemistry. You learned the Scriptures. The first stage of education was called Bet Sefer. And that means the house of the book. And you would begin Bet Sefer around the age of 6. Bet Sefer was taught in the local synagogue, which was the local school. So in the village of Capernaum or Tyre or Sidon, you didn't have a village school, you had a village synagogue. And you had a local Torah teacher, a local rabbi. And so kids at 6 would begin school with the rabbi. Now, on the first day of school, you would sit, and the rabbi would take honey. And every child would have a slate, a piece of slate. And probably in front of them, and that was what they were going to write on. And they would learn the text. But the rabbi would take honey, and he would pour it over the slate that the little kid was having. It would be all over their fingers, and it would be all over their hands. Honey in the Jewish world was a symbol of God's favor, of his luxury. Honey was this rare, this most pleasurable, enjoyable thing that you could imagine. It was this incredible delicacy of honey. And the rabbi would cover the slate of the 6-year-olds with honey, and he'd have it all over them. And then he would say, "My child, my pupil, lick the honey." And these 6-year-olds would lick the honey off their slate. And the rabbi would say, "May you never forget that the words of God are like honey." The words of God are like the most enjoyable, pleasurable thing. He would say, "May you never forget that the words of God are the most enjoyable, pleasurable things you could ever have. Taste and see that God is good." He'd say, "May you be like Ezekiel, who tasted the scroll and said it tasted sweet like honey." So as a small child, the scriptures would be linked in a very tactile sense with the most pleasurable, exotic, joyful thing you could possibly imagine. So how do you feel about the scriptures? Am I preaching yet? Maybe in this context, you should, in your school, have the preschoolers with their Bible cover it in ugali or ice cream. You know? Is that how you feel about the scriptures? About reading them and studying them and memorizing them? For us to be followers of Jesus, I think we have to ask some very difficult questions about what we consider joyful and pleasurable. As a 6-year-old, you would begin memorizing the Torah, Bet Sefer. Bet Sefer lasted from 6 years old to 10 years old. And by 10 years old, you had memorized the Torah. All of Genesis, all of Exodus, all of Leviticus, all of Numbers, all of Deuteronomy memorized. And not just the names of the books, okay? But every chapter, every verse, every word in each of every book. By Bet Sefer, you had it memorized. Some of you have got every player in the Premier League memorized. Some of you have got every lyric of Kalamashaka memorized. And some of you got the songs of Giuliani memorized. How much of the text, how much of the scriptures have you got memorized? If you were to bring the best kid from this church alongside the best kid from the Jewish community in Nairobi, who would win? The Jewish kid, hands down. Why? Because for them, the text was the most delicate, delicious, tasty thing a child could ever have. And you're a parent, and you give them your phone to play with, and not the text to read. Come on. So, the next phase would be ages 10 to 12. It's called Bet Talmud. And during ages 10 to 14, you would continue on if you were the best of the best. Kind of like advanced students would keep going. And in Bet Talmud, you would memorize the rest of the Hebrew Scriptures. Genesis all the way to the prophet Malachi, the Italian prophet. Malachi, okay? The Hebrew prophet. The whole deal. By 13 or 14, you had memorized the entire Hebrew Scriptures, the Old Testament. And you would also learn the art. It's very rational. It's very oriented around the transmission of information. Now, I know it's changing, but you guys came through the same kind of system that I came through, okay? We tended to see education as the teacher would give us information, the student would take that information, and then at the appropriate times, exams, we would give that information back, hopefully in the way it was given to us. Yeah. So we would teach your child, what's 2 plus 2? And the child would say 4. And we say, well done. In the Jewish culture, they see learning as far more interactive, and there's far more processing going on. So the rabbi might say, what do 2 trees plus another 2 trees equal? And the student might answer, why do some trees grow taller than other trees? They were teaching children not only how to just give back information, but how to process and how to think and how to take the discussion further. They would learn this art of questions. That's why often when Jesus was asked a question, what does he respond with? A question. He wasn't being a politician. He was being a Jewish rabbi. The rabbi would teach children this question and answer. And Bet Talmud is roughly from 10 years old to 14 years old. So Jesus' parents leave Jerusalem and they realize Jesus is not with us. And they come back into the temple area and they find Jesus at what age? 12. And what's he doing with his teachers? They were amazed with his questions and answers. Why? Jesus would have been in Bet Talmud. Yeah, it's not just this kid knows, but this kid is giving it right back at us. And something very, very fascinating happens at the end of Bet Talmud. If you're the best of the best of the best, and you've made it through Bet Talmud, there was a third stage of education called Bet Midrash. And a Bet Midrash was generally around the age of 14. And at the age of 14, the best of the best of the best students would go on to train to become rabbis. And the rabbis were the University of Nairobi or the Kenyatta elite. Not from Moy or from Egerton or from Strathmore or even from Daystar, okay? This was, for them to happen to be in the Jerusalem temple, they were the best. And if you were the best of the best of the best, you would go on to be a rabbi. Generally, a rabbi with authority. A rabbi, a powerful rabbi. Now, by the way, each rabbi had their own interpretations of the Torah, the midrash of the rabbis. And different rabbis believe different things about how you live out the text, like the Sabbath. What's allowed on the Sabbath and what isn't allowed on the Sabbath. And one rabbi might permit this and this and this, but forbid that. Or another rabbi might say, oh, I permit that, but not this. And one rabbi might be called looser and just permit lots of things. To permit or to forbid was called to bind and to loose. So when Jesus says, whatever you bind or whatever you loose, it's rabbinical language. And that rabbi's interpretation was called his yoke. When you follow the rabbi, you place yourself under the yoke of the rabbi. My rabbi came along and my rabbi said, my yoke is easy and my burden is light. My yoke isn't about an endless list of rules. My yoke is about freedom. Can I get an amen? Perhaps you know my rabbi. But perhaps Christianity in Kenya has forgotten that our rabbi's yoke is easy. And we've made Christianity about rules and legalism that burdens people and turns people away from Jesus. So, Bet Midrash, you were a good student, the best of the best, and you would choose a rabbi, and one that you admired, and you would go to him and you would say, Rabbi, I want to be your disciple, your Talmud, your student. I want to learn your yoke. And so the rabbi would then begin to question you to see how well you knew the text. He would ask something like this here. In the book of Habakkuk, there are 17 references to Deuteronomy. Give them to me backwards. Does your pastor know that answer? Remember, everybody had it memorized. And the rabbi's driving fundamental question is, does this student have what it takes? Can this student be like me? This is the driving question. Does the student have what it takes to do what I do? And the rabbi is looking to see, does this kid have it? Can he be like me? And if the rabbi decides that this kid can do it, he could actually be like me, the rabbi would say, Lech achare. Come follow me. Come follow me. And you would be 13, 14, 15, 16 years old, and you would leave your family. You would leave your parents, and you would go and sit and learn and follow the dust of the rabbi. Church tradition has it that in Mark's Gospel chapter 1, there's James and there's John and there's Simon and there's Andrew, and they drop their nets and they leave fishing, and immediately they follow Jesus. Why? Why do they immediately drop everything they have and follow this Jesus that walked onto the shore? Because they had grown up hoping that one day they might get out of town and they might make it to Jerusalem. And the only way that could happen was if a rabbi called them. But they hadn't done too well on the account of school. And they'd stumbled through Bet Sefer, and hence they were fishing for a living. They were not the elite students of Strathmore or Daystar or Kenyatta. But along walks a rabbi, and he calls to them to follow him. All other rabbis didn't invite you. You asked them, and then they put you through the ringer of Torah examination and more. But this rabbi, Jesus, believes in me, believes I've got what it takes to be his disciple. You would drop everything you possibly were doing immediately to follow this rabbi. And this rabbi is still inviting men and women, you and 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 you, to follow him and drop immediately what you're doing and follow him. Whether you're male or whether you're female, whether you're rich or whether you're poor, whether you're educated or not educated, whether you're from Langata or Syokimau or here or Huruma. So I can hear Mr. Zebedee You darn kids. You're always running off around here. Perhaps Zebedee came home that night. Honey, 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 the boys aren't with me. I can see that. Honey, honey, the boys aren't with me. I know, I can see that. Honey, 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 what do you mean? This rabbi came along who thinks that our boys have what it takes. Can you imagine Zebedee the next day in the village? Oh yeah, you know, as you can see, the boys are not with me today. Right? Why? Well, my boys are going to be studying with a powerful rabbi. A rabbi called your boys? Yeah! Can you imagine what it would be like to have your sons called? I mean, can you imagine his reputation in the community? Come back to the text, okay? Come back to the text. And so there are 12. 12. The original disciples. And Jesus commissioned them, 12 of them, 12. And a bell might begin to ring in your head, 12. There's something in that number, 12. The 12 tribes of Israel, the 12 commandments. No, there's only 10. Okay, the 12 disciples, the 12. Numerologists would say that 12 is the number of divine government. 12 tribes of Israel, 12 patriarchs of Israel, 12 apostles, 12 gates in Jerusalem, 12 angels sitting on the 12 gates of the New Jerusalem, 12 foundations of that same city. 12 is the number of divine government. It's certainly the number of the tribes of Israel. The community of people called to himself. And now Israel is rejecting this Messiah, this rabbi, this Jesus. And in the appointing of 12 apostles, Jesus the Christ, the Messiah, is starting a new Israel, a new community belonging to God, a new family. And he is redefining Israel around himself and his followers. There's a hint of this newness in some words that are used here in Mark's Gospel chapter 3 verse 14. The Greek word translated designated and the word translated appointed are best translated in the English languages made and naming. Jesus is making and Jesus is naming. This is creatorial language. This is Genesis 1 language. This is new creation language. And new creation language is a powerful language. You see, the Jewish teachers thought that when the Messiah would come, he would rebuild the temple that used to be here. He would restore Israel to the position they used to have when David was king and he ruled and enemies were fled and flattened. They thought he would come and do a better version of what they had known. But Jesus is not doing a better version of what was before. Jesus is doing a new thing, a new creation, a new covenant, a new community. And this is so very, very exciting because here's the massiveness of what Jesus is doing. The scale and the size of this. The radicalness of this, the impact of this is ground-shaking, earth-moving, destiny-changing, world history-defining, and then to top it all off, he calls the sons of thunder. And Peter with his rashness, and Matthew who was a cheating tax guy, and Bartholomew who we don't know anything about. A ragtag bunch of nobodies to start it all with. And in that brilliance, he turns the societal tables upside down. He turns conventional theory upside down. He turns the status quo upside down. And he loudly, boldly, controversially invites ordinary you and me. Stuttering, stumbling, skinny-armed, bald-headed, freckly me called Gilbert. And equally ordinary you to be involved in this new creation that is better and greater than anything that's gone before. He invites little old me and little old you to join in. He designates and he appoints, and he's still designating and appointing. He's still making and naming ordinary people to build this new community, be this new community, and live out this new community. Justice, it's a community that stands against injustice, and it stands in with the poor and the left outs. So Destiny Life Church, you may not yet have your new fancy building. You may not yet have a big TV ministry. You may be a church filled with many young people who are just starting out in your careers and starting fun. You may not have your act all together. But in this church, amongst this group of believers, the eternal God is naming and making you into a new community, a new family for a new purpose. And he's naming Phillips and Mary and Baraka and Eric and Kenneth and Pauline and Eunice and Chelsea and Titus and Wendy and Samuel and Keoke and also many more as members of this new community. And he's pinning his salvation. He's pinning his plan to save the world on this ragtag bunch of stuttering, stumbling, dancing, singing, amazing but trembling people of Destiny Life Church. People who know that his yoke is easy and his burden is light. So may you as a church, and may this year for this church be about living out that new creation, bringing this new family, these new relationships to this community and beyond for the glory of God. Christ be with you.